It's what the scientist demands. Let me explain to you what I mean. You see, today there are any number of people who have ideas about how the universe works. They have theories. You could find them all over the place. But the scientific community doesn't even bother to listen to them. Why? Because within the last century, the scientific community has demanded one thing. They say, if you have a theory, don't bother me with it unless you bring with that theory a way to prove that you are wrong, a test of falsification. Otherwise, don't bother me. That's why the scientific community listened to Einstein toward the beginning of this century, because he came with a new theory. He says, I think the universe works like this, and here are 3 ways to prove that I'm wrong. So the scientific community listened. They subjected it to the test. Within 6 years, he passed the tests which he offered. It doesn't prove he's right, but it proves he deserves to be listened to. Because he said, this is my idea, and in fact, try this. You want to prove I'm wrong? Here, do this. That's what the Quran has. Falsification tests. Some that are old, some that exist till today. Because it makes statements saying, if this book is not what it claims to be, then all you have to do is this or this or this to prove that it's false. It offers falsification. I'd suggest to you, maybe the next time you get into some kind of a dispute with somebody about Islam, and he's claiming he has the truth and you are in the darkness, that might be the first thing that you suggest. To tell him, is there something in your religion which, if I could show it to you, would prove you're wrong? Is there anything? Because I can promise you, people won't have anything. They don't carry around that idea that I should not only present what I believe, but I should offer a man a chance to prove me wrong. But Islam does that. The Quran says this is the truth, and to prove that it isn't, try this or this or this. As examples of that, you have what was to me the most surprising verse that I read in the Quran when I first read through it, in the 4th surah, the 82nd ayah, where it says, have they not carefully considered the Quran? If it came from other than Allah, surely they would find in it many inconsistencies. Now that is a challenge to the unbeliever. Saying to the unbeliever, you say this book is not a revelation, then of course you will show me a mistake in the book, won't you? It surprised me because that's not really even human nature to write like that. We don't take an exam in school, and when we finish the exam, we write a note to the teacher saying, this exam is perfect. There are no mistakes in it. Find one if you can. We don't do that. The teacher won't sleep until he finds a mistake. And yet, that's the way the Quran comes. It says, this is true. In fact, if you don't think it's true, then all you have to do is show an inconsistency, where it says this, but it says that, and it contradicts itself. It should contain many of those things, shouldn't it? So find one. But more about that later on. That's one example of this kind of thing, of offering a falsification test. Maybe more interesting to you today is that there's another attitude that comes out in the Quran over and over, and that is advice to the reader. It tells the reader about different facts, and then it gives the advice saying, if you want to know more about this, or if you doubt what is said here, then ask the man who knows. Ask the men of ilm. The literal expression in Arabic means today the scientist. Because if you don't believe it, ask the man whose specialty this is. Ask the man who knows these things. He will tell you this is true. That too is a surprising attitude. To have a book that comes from somebody without training in these things, but when he talks about geography or botany, biology, whatever his subject, he mentions something and then says, if you doubt it, go ask the man. Ask the man who knows this thing. He'll tell you this is true. In every age, there have been Muslims who have followed that advice. and made some surprising discoveries. If you look through the Muslim scientists of so many centuries ago, you'll find that their works are full of quotations from the Quran. They will tell you that they did research in such and such a place, they looked for something, and they tell you, the reason I looked there for this thing is because the Quran says such and so. It told me this is a good place to look. It pointed me in this direction, and I found this. The Quran says, for example, about the origin of man. Mentions a place about where man comes from, and then it says to the reader, research it. Gives you a bare hint of the origin of man, and then it says to you, you should find out more about this. You should research it, and it gives you a hint where to look. That's the kind of thing that Muslims today, largely it seems, overlook, but not always. A few years ago, a group of brothers in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, collected all of the verses in the Quran that talk about the growth of the human being in the womb, embryology. They took the advice of the Quran, asked the man who knows. So they wanted to find out, is what the Quran says? What is the truth? And so they asked the man who knows. They chose, as it happened, a man who is professor of embryology at the University of Toronto in my city, not a Muslim. His name is Keith Moore. He's the author of textbooks on embryology. He knows. He's a world expert in embryology. So they invited him to Riyadh. They said, this is what the Quran says about your subject. Is it true? What can you tell us? They gave him all the help that he needed in translation, all the cooperation that he asked for, and he was so surprised at what he found that he changed his textbooks. You'll find, in fact, as I say, one of his textbooks is called Before We Are Born. As of the second edition of that textbook, in the history of embryology, he includes some material that wasn't in the first one because of what he found out the Quran says, that it was ahead of its time. People knew what other people didn't know, if they believed the Quran, all those centuries ago. I had the pleasure just about a week ago of interviewing him for a television presentation. We talked a great deal about this. It was illustrated by slides and so on. He mentioned that, in fact, some of the things that the Quran said about the growth of the human being weren't known until 30 years ago. In fact, one item, he said, was new to him. But he checked on it. It was true, so he added it to his book. That in particular had to do with the description of the embryo. What is its appearance? When he read the description in the Quran, he thought about it. He said it's when it describes the human being that at one stage it resembles alaka, a leech-like clot. He said, I'd never thought of that before, but he went to the zoology department and asked for a picture of a leech, and it looks like the embryo. So he put both pictures in one of his textbooks. He has another one on clinical embryology. When he presented this information last fall in Toronto, it caused quite a lot of stir across Canada. It was reported in the newspapers. It was on the front page of many newspapers across Canada with some funny headlines, but people don't clearly understand what it's all about, I guess. One headline said, was it surprising things found in ancient prayer book, something like this. But one newspaper reporter asked the professor, they said, don't you think maybe the Arabs might have known about these things? The description of the embryo, its appearance, and how it changes and grows. Maybe because they weren't scientists, but maybe they did some crude dissections